For the next map dowsing target, you'll be able to choose between using a pendulum or a single L-rod. Paul Smith will briefly review the map dowsing process and reveal a successful military operation that utilized map dowsing. After Paul concludes the introduction, we'll review the process in more detail.
Okay. First of all, I'm going to start off giving you an example of a real map dowsing case. You've probably all heard about this. Soviets lost this Tu-22 somewhere in Africa. Okay, it was in the jungle. In fact, when they found the aircraft, the plane had gone nose in, and so its tail and fuselage were parallel with the trees in the triple canopy forest, which is why they couldn't find it from the air. Okay. It was down in what was then Zaire, which is now again the Congo. Dale Graff was the one that was running this project, and he brought in this Air Force enlisted woman and said, okay, can you use remote viewing to do this? What she used wasn't really remote viewing, it was really dowsing, although I don't know that she actually recognized it as that. What she did essentially was take her pen and kind of feel what felt right on the map and put a circle where it felt right. A little tiny circle, worked out to about a 3 square mile, or the 3 mile diameter space on the ground. And she didn't know it was in Zaire. She had a map of Africa to work from. So on the entire continent of Africa, made a little 3 mile circle, okay? And the aircraft was found in that circle when they finally went to look for it, okay? That's a case of dowsing. Just in general, the idea here is you have a map. The map is a model for the ground area, or ground or water, it can be water as well, right, where something may be that we're looking for, a person, a valuable, a missing animal, who knows what, okay. And then the idea is then to mark on the map the correct location of that object so that it can be retrieved or whatever it is you need to do with it, you can do. Okay. There are a couple of different, there are 2 different modes of dowsing that are often talked about. One is called continuum, and the other one I think is called discrete. And what we have done is discrete, where you have a finite number of locations, and whatever you're seeking is in one of those locations. Continuum dowsing is where you have just an area or a continuum, and it could be anywhere on there. Okay, so the idea is with continuum dowsing, it can be anywhere. Discrete dowsing, you have a limited set of places it can be. Discrete dowsing tends, I think, to be easier conceptually, and perhaps easier in a result sense as well. Some of you may find that your pendulum's great, but the L-rods are useless. Or you may find the L-rods are great, but you only use one of them. Some of you may find you don't like these devices at all, and you go just with the deviceless dowsing. Okay. And then some of you will find that sometimes one works better than another. It depends on the circumstance, it depends on the mood you're in, and then you have, of course, a palette of things that you can employ. Right. So back to the map dowsing. Once we've established a mark on the page, one line, of course, only captures where it is somewhere along that line. You don't know where it could be, and like on this map of Europe, we're talking about 2,000 miles maybe that it could be. Of course, you've decreased the possibilities dramatically, but it's still an almost infinite data set if it's a very small thing. Okay, so what do? Well, you borrow something from radio direction finding called triangulation. When you want to find a radio transmitter, whether you're the FCC or in a war, which is where I learned it for military, you try and get 3 different cuts to the signal. So the signal's out here, you might take a reading from here that points you in a direction, take a reading from up here that points you in this direction, and you point a reading from here and points in this direction, and where the 3 come together, generally speaking, should be where your radio transmitter is. And you can do the same thing with map dowsing. So what you do is, you've dowsed one direction, you turn the ruler, usually at 90 degrees or thereabouts, and you go up and you get where it crosses again. Now, Charles is right, in a perfect world, you'd only need those 2 to fix the location on the ground. The problem is, with radio direction finding and with map dowsing, you don't always get that precision. In fact, you usually don't get that precision. You're usually off by a few degrees. And so you might come close, but on a map this size, that close is 50 or 100 miles. Okay? So in radio direction finding, then you come in from a third, third direction as orthogonal as possible, as off the other two axes as possible, and you come in and you make one more cut. We call this making a cut. And that usually gives you a triangle within which it's going to be. So you have this triangle, and if you're working on a small scale, that may be enough. Like if you're trying to find a downed aircraft out in the middle of the desert in some rocky area, coming within 100 or 200 yards of it is close enough, and you'll be able to find it, presumably.
Let's review. Map dowsing is based on successfully triangulating a general location on a map, which should accurately encompass the desired object's location. The complete process to finish one map dowsing session will require you to draw 3 straight lines on a map with a ruler and a pen. This, of course, means that you will need to conduct 3 separate dowsing attempts, one after the other. First, you'll need to decide which tool you would like to use for the map dowsing exercise. You may use a pendulum or a single L rod. You may also have noticed that Paul mentioned deviceless dowsing. This refers to dowsers that use their own bodies to act as the tool, such as their hand or a finger, or even their inner sensations. Just as with a pendulum or an L rod, they are trained to receive feedbacks through twitches, tingles, or other indications for a yes response. Be aware that deviceless dowsing can be extremely difficult for beginning students, and feedback indications may be more likely induced by analytical thinking than when you're using an external tool. This will be discussed in more detail later. Okay, back to the process. After a dowser has selected his or her tool, the map dowsing session will begin like any other session by first programming a yes indication and a no indication. Let's review map dowsing programming for both tools, starting with a pendulum. Just as with target 1, programming for a pendulum begins by moving the tool in a small circular motion and indicating the standard yes and no responses. Remember, the alternate method for those that are more comfortable with the process is to begin with your pendulum at a standstill and wait for small movements to affect the pendulum's indication. Either way, if the pendulum moves in a side-to-side motion, this will be your no indication. If the pendulum begins moving in a forward-to-back motion, this is your indication for yes. If you have decided to use a single L rod instead of a pendulum, the process is slightly different. Hold the single L rod out in front of you with either your left or right hand in the standard starting position. Attempt to keep the rod perfectly motionless, just as you did for target 2. This time, however, when the rod moves in any direction, including motions resulting from subtle twitches in the hand, this is your indication for yes. The purpose for having a free hand during a map dowsing session is because you'll also need to use a ruler and a pen. While your pendulum or L rod hand is providing feedback indications, your other hand will be slowly moving a ruler across your map. This is where the process may get a little tricky, and practice becomes important. Here's another dowsing student to demonstrate the process using an L rod. First, begin your scan of the map from the bottom to the top. Try not to take too long to complete this process. Remember, you generally only have about 10 to 15 seconds, or slightly longer, depending on the size of the map you are working on, to identify feedback to help minimize analytical overlay. Because the tool and your subconscious must wait for the ruler to be near the target area before providing a feedback indication, timing becomes crucial, and engaging in two simultaneous actions may be difficult to do at first. As a result, if you are unsure of a feedback indication or did not receive one at all, you may scan the map again. This time, you may scan in the same direction as before, or if you feel your analytical mind is getting in the way, you may choose to switch directions and scan from the top to the bottom to help reduce redundancy. Sense where your yes indication is. Momentarily put down your dowsing instrument and pick up your pen and draw a line. Now, the dowser must repeat this process again, but from a perpendicular direction, scanning from the left to the right. Again, you may repeat the scan by moving the ruler from the right to the left. Decide where your yes indication is. Hold your ruler still, pick up your pen, and draw a line. Finally, to complete the triangulation, the dowser must now repeat the process, but from a diagonal approach. Begin at the lower right corner of the map and move the ruler to the upper left corner. You may repeat the scan again by moving the ruler from the upper left to the lower right. Decide where your yes indication is. Hold your ruler still, pick up your pen, and draw a line. Once the dowser has completed the session, there should be a small triangular area which indicates the general location of the object like this. Remember, the standard dowsing protocol also applies to map dowsing, just as it did with on-site dowsing. After programming your tool, you must define, write, and verbalize a task, and focus only on the intent of that task while scanning your map. Also, don't forget the rules for minimizing and expelling AOLs, which include setting down your instrument, clearing your mind, and continuing the session where you left off. We're going to move right into executing Target 3. If you're not ready, this is your chance to pause or stop the DVD. Otherwise, we'll proceed. I see you're ready to execute target number 3, your very first map dowsing exercise. At this point, the class had been instructed to execute 2 complete dowsing targets to begin narrowing down the specific location for this. Don't be fooled, this isn't the original Stonehenge, but a life-size replica located somewhere else in the world called Stonehenge 2. In the class, Paul began by providing everyone with a world map. After completing a map dowsing session, the class's majority vote was that the target was within the United States. Next, Paul Smith handed each student a copy of a U.S. map and asked the class to narrow down the location once again. The result was that Stonehenge, too, was located somewhere in Texas. This is where you come in. Now that the target has been narrowed down to Texas, it's your job to find which county. As instructed back in Segment 1, you will be required to print out or manually make a copy of template number 3, which is a map of Texas. You will also need the following materials before executing your session: a blank sheet of paper, a black pen, a ruler constructed from any material, either a pendulum or a single L rod based on which tool you have decided to use for this exercise, some tape to hold down the corners of your map to prevent slipping, and finally, the remote to your DVD player. Please do not utilize tape that can cause damage to the table or surface you are using for this target. Before we proceed, let's program your tool. You should be familiar with the programming process by now, so please take a moment and complete this task. Begin programming your tool now. Okay, now ensure that all of the materials are laid out in front of you. Pick up your pen and a blank sheet of paper and take a moment to verbalize and write down your Target 3 task, which is locate where in Texas is Stonehenge 2. Do this right now and then move the paper away from your view. Now focus only on the intent of the task you just verbalized and wrote down. Nothing else should be on your mind. Do not think and do not speak. Only feel. Try to remain completely focused. You may sometimes find it helpful to visualize the image of the target in your mind's eye and hold its name in your head continuously. If you do become distracted, follow the process for dispelling AOLs, which includes briefly setting your pendulum or L rod down on the table. Have the map of Texas directly in front of you right now. Set your ruler horizontally across the bottom of the map. Make sure your black pen is nearby and hold your pendulum or L rod in the hand of your choice. When I indicate for you to begin executing your target, you must use your DVD player remote and pause the video. At that time, you can relax and begin your session. Once your session is complete, resume play and we'll proceed to the target's feedback. Get ready and begin now. Congratulations! You have just completed your first map dowsing target. Let's move on. It's important to proceed directly to the target feedback after a session. If you did not complete the dowsing session, stop, go back, and do it now. If you're ready, let's proceed to the target feedback. Remember, your map of Texas should contain 3 lines that make up a triangle. Pay close attention to whether the target is located within your triangle or near any of your drawn lines. Let's rejoin the class as Paul Smith reveals the target.
That's it. There you go. There you go. Here is the location of Stonehenge 2. But it's an authentic replica of Stonehenge.
So, how did you do? Just as before, remember what it felt like as you decided upon each of your 3 indications, and pay close attention to your analytical thinking process. Though harder said than done, you cannot allow your analytical mind to interfere with the dowsing process. Remember, you should not be trying to guess the answer, but this should come easier with practice. Another caution to bear in mind while performing a map dowsing project is that when you're presented with a map, or even a blank sheet of paper, there is a human psychological tendency to have a bias towards finding the target more towards the central area. Obviously, in a real-world situation, the target might just as easily be located anywhere, even towards the outer edges. Forewarned is forearmed. Train yourself to go where your instruments and inner impressions indicate, not where your brain tells you to go. The sooner you are more able to discard your predefined assumptions and ignore the habit of guessing the answer to a target, the more accurate you should become. At this time, feel free to pause or stop the DVD and take a break. The next segment will cover dowsing diagrams. Congratulations on the incredible progress you've been making. At this point, the dowsing protocols should begin to feel more natural, and executing sessions should be less difficult as you continue to repeat the dowsing steps. Let's join Paul as he presents a successful military operation that utilized diagram dowsing. Afterwards, we'll review the uses that diagram dowsing can be applied to, as well as a brief presentation of a student conducting a session.
Dowsing diagrams, or using diagrams for dowsing, however you want to phrase it, is really just a sort of more refined form of map dowsing. You'll use pretty much all the same techniques and things, but there are a few more things that allow you to do, and there are some applications of diagrams that really aren't so closely akin to map dowsing, but you'll see those as we go. Okay? So I'm going to show you a real-world example. There are 6 container ships coming into a harbor somewhere in the United States. And they had gotten a human source, a human intelligence source, that said that there was contraband on actually on 2 of the ships. Which one has the contraband? Well, the best way it seemed to do was to douse this, but we didn't have a map, obviously. So what I did was I created this is a freehand diagram, right? These 6 stretched out ovals, and I said, okay, I'm going to put A, B, C, D, E, and F on these, and I don't know which ones they are. You can assign your own names to what these are. So do that off on the side. So I didn't want to know the ship names, and then I dowsed each one and indicated one that I felt strongly had contraband on board, and you can see that one I've circled. Then, of course, you want to know where on the ship this was. Okay? And I describe it. Contraband is located in a closed, stuffy, metal-walled space and is packed in brown, cardboard-like containers with plastic sheeting inside wrapping contents, which are white, granular, like tide that has been wet and then dried. So it's lumpy, hard, kind of clumpy, right? They kept saying drugs, and I kept saying I'm not comfortable with the word drugs. I started off with contraband, so I'm calling it contraband. If it's drugs, fine, but I just want to use the word contraband here. I'm better about that. They stopped the vessel. They located the container that I had indicated from that dowsing. They pulled it out of the cargo and they opened it up, and it was full of clumpy, white, granular contraband. It was this rare white coral they were smuggling into the United States. This shows us a couple things. It's not just that dowsing works, but it also shows that oftentimes the perception one gets are absolutely literal, and yet the interpretations are completely off the mark. All right, so the point here, though, is to show you how diagrams are useful here. Clearly, a map wouldn't have done this, wouldn't have got you this. You have to kind of abstract away, determine what your problem is, and then come up with a diagram that will allow you to actually use your dowsing, your intuition, to define what the particular thing is you're seeking. But you can have diagrams of magnitude, how much of something or how little of something. And we could be talking here of actual substances, or of energy, or of degree, or whatever, all kinds of different possible quantities.
Here are some of the diagram types that can be used for certain scenarios in which dowsing diagrams may be useful. Magnitude diagrams refer to any diagram in which a dowsing session can indicate an amount or a percentage. For example, you may create or use a chart that contains a scale from 0 to 100%. Location diagrams, such as recreating a rough diagram of your house, a place of business, or a defined search area on land. Usually a location diagram is useful to help find objects, substances, or people which are located within a specific boundary. Directional diagrams can provide directional data similar to that given by a compass and may be helpful for determining a direction toward a desired object, destination, or even in conjunction with other resources to safety in times of danger. Decision diagrams may be helpful in choosing between two options, such as which house you should buy or which job offer you should accept. Some diagrams, such as a fan sketch, are basic enough to adapt to multiple diagram types and dowsing situations. For example, it could be used as a magnitude meter from low to high, or as a directional indicator. Some of these diagrams are available in the student resources at learndowsing.com and can be utilized for your own homemade targets and dowsing projects. For the next diagram target, you will be dowsing a location diagram. Once again, decide on whether you'll be using a pendulum or a single L rod. The protocol you will use is a mix between map dowsing and on-site dowsing. Your previous experience executing targets 1, 2, and 3 should make this dowsing exercise fairly easy to follow. The location diagram that the student is using to demonstrate your next target is actually template number 4, which represents a room with multiple tables. For this example, the student will be using a pendulum. After the student programs her pendulum and follows proper tasking protocol, she begins by placing one finger on the first table and begins the active dowsing process, focusing only on the intent of her task. This process is repeated until each table is dowsed at least once, and a specific table is identified as the correct location. Remember, the standard dowsing protocol also applies to diagram dowsing, just as it did with on-site and map dowsing. After programming your tool, you must define, write, and verbalize a task and focus only on the intent of that task while dowsing your diagram. Also, don't forget the rules for minimizing and expelling AOLs.
So now we're going to do a diagram dowsing exercise. And this is the one where you get to douse the cat toy.
You're about to execute target number 4. If you're not ready, pause or stop the DVD now. Otherwise, we'll proceed. The cat toy shown at the end of segment 15 has been hidden in the concession area of the dowsing training area. Template 4, which will be used for this target, is a diagram that accurately illustrates the layout of tables in the area during that day. While the class members wait to begin the exercise, a staff member places the toy on one of the tables. Make sure you have a copy of Template 4 from either learndowsing.com or from manually copying the diagram from your dowsing training set manual. In addition to the template, you will also need the following materials before beginning your session: a blank sheet of paper, a black pen, either a pendulum or a single L rod based on which tool you have decided to use for this exercise, and finally, the remote to your DVD player. Before we proceed, you must program your chosen tool. Begin programming now. Okay, now ensure that all of the materials are laid out in front of you. Pick up your pen and a blank sheet of paper and take a moment to verbalize and write down your target 4 task, which is locate which table holds the Smith family cat's toy. Do this right now and then move the paper away from your view. Now focus only on the intent of the task you just verbalized and wrote down. Nothing else should be on your mind. Remember to follow the process for dispelling AOLs. At this time, place Template 4 directly in front of you. When I indicate that it is time for you to begin this exercise, pause the video. At that time, you can relax and begin your session. Once you are finished, resume play and we'll proceed to the target feedback. Get ready and begin now. Congratulations! You have just completed your first diagram dowsing target. Let's move on. It's important to proceed directly to the target feedback after a session. If you did not complete the dowsing session, stop, go back, and do it now. If you're ready, let's proceed to the target feedback. You may have noticed that the target preparation segments and sample sessions are shortening as you progress through the dowsing set. This is meant to encourage self-preparation and the execution of the targets by relying on what you have already learned regarding dowsing protocol, rather than the process being continually reiterated by the training program. This will help prepare you for setting up and executing your own practice targets at home, and sharpen your ability to adapt to any situation in which dowsing may be effectively used. Okay, back to the target. The cat toy was located on the far left table, which is table number 1 on your diagram. You're finally beginning to get some dowsing sessions under your belt. But remember, learning any new skill, including dowsing, takes time. You've spent nearly your entire life relying mostly on your analytical thinking process. Training yourself to temporarily set aside your analytical thought processes so they don't get in the way of your emerging intuition can be challenging. It takes dedication, practice, and persistence to become skilled and progress. The purpose of these initial training targets is not necessarily to get the correct answer. Even if you're missing the dowsing targets, you have been making progress in learning to better integrate your conscious and subconscious mind, allowing each to cooperate better with the other. The practice targets you have been executing are designed to begin changing the pre-established habit of relying mostly on analytical thinking to find answers to an unknown question or the location of an unknown target. Remember, the goal is to slowly become more intuitive and allow more data from the subconscious mind to come through to conscious awareness. As a beginner student, I'm sure you have had moments in which you were unintentionally trying to guess the answer. Or you may have caught yourself analyzing the target or focusing too much on your dowsing device, over-controlling it rather than allowing the tool's response to be more spontaneous. This is entirely normal and to be expected for beginning dowsers. Keep at it, and you might be surprised how much progress you'll make in time. At this time, feel free to pause or stop the DVD and take a break. The next segment will cover dowsing matrices. Dowsing a matrix or matrices is similar to map and diagram dowsing. However, instead of directly dowsing a map or a diagram as you did earlier, your template will consist of a printed grid, which you will be using to mark your location or locations. After concluding a dowsing session, the grid or matrix is then overlaid on a predetermined map to decipher the true target's location. One reason for utilizing a matrix as opposed to traditional map dowsing is to help remove analytical overlay by keeping the target blind to the dowser. Without being able to identify roads or land features such as you would in dowsing a map directly, there is now no reference to where the target may be based on analytical thinking. A matrix can also be used to dowse locations in an area of unknown shape and dimensions, or for determining numbers.
All a matrix is a, I guess you could say, a notional surface on which you record your dowsing impressions, which will then be later matched up with the diagram or map that you're going to actually use. And a blank sheet counts as a matrix, at least as far as I describe it. And really, in a way, a matrix is just a very minimalist diagram in a sense, except it isn't labeled, Nothing is specified on it as to what each thing represents. Okay, it's intended to be uniform for a particular reason. Okay, a matrix can be dowsed as a continuum or discretely. Remember we talked about those two different kinds, discrete, which is our diagram dowsing in here. Most diagram dowsings are discrete. They're individual positions where things can be, or individual values for things, and you don't have to worry about it being in a kind of, an ambiguous or an amorphous sort of an area. Once you're done, this matrix is going to be overlaid on a map or diagram. That's where its value comes in. Okay, and then you can take it and refer it to a further representation of some real location or situation. Finally, they're usually used when it's important for the dowser to be blind to as much of the target as possible. Maybe there is something about this target that would lead the dowser, that would lead him or her to jump to some conclusions about the target that would mess up the dowsing, make it less accurate. You might say this is sort of a simulated missing person sort of an event, where there's someone we need to find, hostage victim or whatever. We're going to home in on where that person is and find the location. So we're using, in this case, Brian as our outbounder, and we're going to try and find out, dowsing this matrix here, where his position would be represented on the matrix when we compare it to the map that is the underlying base for this. Okay?
Because of the similarities to map and diagram dowsing, which you should now be familiar with, there will be a minimum amount of video preparation. So this is your chance to apply everything you have learned thus far to execute a dowsing session from beginning to end with little assistance. Just as with map and diagram dowsing, you may choose between using a pendulum or a single L rod. For this example, the student has chosen to use a pendulum. When utilizing a pendulum, begin by slowly moving the instrument around the matrix. And mark any yes responses by placing an X in the corresponding block until you have covered each box on the entire sheet. If you do not wish to use the pendulum as a pointer while dowsing, you may use a finger from your free hand to point to and dowse each box individually. The process remains similar for sessions in which you'll be using a single L rod. Scan the sheet with your finger while waiting for a response from your L rod. Mark all of your yes responses accordingly. Remember to rely more on your first impression and try not to scan the matrix for too long, as this may result in increased AOL. As you dowse, apply the previous protocols you have learned, including dowsing at a steady but quick pace and handling AOLs. There is no minimum or maximum number of boxes you must check during this exercise. This time, it's entirely up to you. The pattern that you choose to dowse your matrix is also up to your discretion. When you are finished, your answers will be compared to the associated reference map in the target feedback segment. That's all there is to it. We're going to move right into executing Target 5 without taking a break. Are you ready? Let's continue to segment 19. You will be executing this target with only 7 of the class students. One of the students has been sent by the instructor to an undisclosed location somewhere in the city of Austin. Your matrix diagram will be overlaid onto a map to reveal the student's location. Here are the materials you will need for Target 5. A pendulum or an L rod, a copy of Template 5, a blank sheet of paper, a black pen, and finally, the remote to your DVD player. Your task for this target is locate the student's location in reference to Paul Smith's map of Austin, Texas. Remember, this target will be prepared and executed entirely by you. So when I instruct you to pause the video, you should begin by following the dowsing protocol. From verbalizing and writing down your task on a blank sheet of paper to conducting an entire active dowsing session. Be careful not to be distracted by your analytical thoughts or AOLs, and keep to an appropriate pace during the session. Once you have completed your session, resume play and we'll proceed to target feedback. Begin now. Congratulations! You completed a matrix dowsing session relying strictly on what you have learned thus far in the program. Let's continue. By now, you understand the importance of receiving immediate target feedback, so let's proceed. If you did not complete the dowsing session, stop, go back, and do it now. The student was located here. By looking at your template, you should have a good idea of how close you were to the target. Remember to analyze your feelings during the session in conjunction to how close or far away you were from the target. Okay, let's proceed. At this time, feel free to pause or stop the DVD and take a break. The next segment will cover timeline dowsing. This is the final form of dowsing, and the last target we will be executing in the Learn Dowsing training set. After your timeline dowsing target is complete and you have received feedback, we will continue by reviewing additional tips about dowsing and practicing at home.
Dowsing timelines. Now, if I think this is our last dowsing topic where we actually talk about techniques and things. All right. There'll be times when you want to know when something happened, or to a lesser degree, when something is going to happen. We would use this to find out when certain things happen, perhaps in in a research and development environment. Okay, here's, for example, the failed Chinese nuclear test at Lop Nor. We want to find out what happened. Okay, so you might have a timeline that you go along and try and determine when certain events happen in relation to others to help you understand how the overall event unfolded and what may or may not have gone wrong. Okay, so there's a use there. To have one, you have to have a specific start time, and usually you're going to want a specific end time as well. There are occasions when you might not, but we will only worry about ones where we have a beginning and an end time. Okay? You can scale them to any period of time. And what I mean by that is they can be minutes, 5 minutes ago to the present. They can be hours, say yesterday between 12 noon and 5 in the afternoon. They can be days, have a time range of Tuesday to Thursday. They can be weeks, from certain date to another date, 14 days later. Months, years, centuries. Okay, you can make them any scale. The one thing to remember, though, is that the larger the span is, the more focused you're going to have to be. The broader the period of time, the bigger the event has to be to stand out, because then it starts mushing in with all the other events that happen along that timeline. And so it's helpful if you can use the other methods to narrow down the period of time in which you need to explore this event, and that will make it easier for you to detect it because it will stand out more prominently. You want to make it as short as possible, even for the Hiroshima moment. If you could, like, you want to know when it happened, if you can narrow it down to a 3-day span through other means, then that's still going to be helpful, right? But it is going to show up even if you have a long time frame. But on the other case, maybe your little event going from one place to another, you don't have any choice but to have a 4-month timeline, because that's as close as you can narrow it down to. Well, you work with what you get. You know, you do what you can with what you have. And so the goal is just to get the period as short as possible. You have to specify your intermediate units, because if you have a start time of 1989 and an end time of 2001, and you don't divide it up so you know where on that timeline each unit falls, like years or months or years and months or however you want it, you might go along and find the location and mark it, and then you look at it and say, what does that mean? Well, let's see, it's 2/3, I've done this before, it's 2/3 of the way to 2000, so let's see, 89 to 2001 is, I'm sorry, it's 12 years. Yeah, 12 years. 2/3 of 12 is 8, so this must be 1997. Well, you know, if you're going to go to the work, make it as precise as you can, okay? So if you've specified the units on, and I'll show you some examples here, that will make it easier for your subconscious to register where something is in relation to something else. With timelines, it's just like anything else. You can, let's say you only have a 10-year period, you're able to narrow it down to one of those years. You can then create a new timeline that's just 1 year long and narrow it down to the month, and then keep on going like that, as long as you can stand it, you know, you don't get tired or whatever, come back the next day, whatever. It works the same way with any other kind of dowsing, where you start off with general and you can work it down to the more specific, as long as your patience holds on this.
When dowsing a timeline, there is still some debate whether tasks that are associated with future events provide accurate data. The debate regarding whether or not the future has yet to happen or is already determined continues. Please keep this in mind when you begin to experiment with timeline dowsing. To avoid such complications, you will be dowsing a past event for this timeline dowsing exercise. As with Target 5, you should be thoroughly familiar with the dowsing protocol by now. So we're going to jump right into executing Target 6 with little assistance. Just as before, choose which tool you would like to use. If utilizing a pendulum, move the pendulum along the timeline until you receive a yes indication. You may also use your finger and move it across the line as you wait for feedback indications. If you are utilizing an L-rod, you will also use a finger to scan the timeline until a response is indicated by the rod. Just as with map dowsing, you may choose to make another pass along the timeline from each direction if necessary. Remember to focus only on the intent of your task while paying less attention to the dowsing instrument or the content on your template. Some dowsers also find it helpful to completely look away from the pendulum or L rods for a small amount of time to help minimize AOL and intentional movements. Let's execute Target 6. Target 6 will require you to dowse a timeline to determine the year in which Velcro was invented. Please decide to use either a pendulum or a single L rod, just as you have done with several of the previous targets. Also, ensure that you have the following materials in front of you: a copy of Template 6, a blank sheet of paper, a black pen, and finally, the remote to your DVD player. Your task for this target is to identify which year Velcro was invented. Just as with target number 5, this target will be prepared and executed entirely by you. So when I instruct you to pause the video, you should begin by following the dowsing protocol. From verbalizing and writing down your task on a blank sheet of paper to conducting an entire active dowsing session. Be careful not to be distracted by your analytical thoughts or AOLs, and keep to an appropriate pace during the session. Once you have completed your session, resume play and we'll proceed to target feedback. Begin now. We're now going to proceed to target feedback. If you did not complete the dowsing session, stop, go back, and do it now. Based strictly on your feedback indications, do you have a good feeling around which year Velcro was invented?
1948, June.
The answer is 1948.
You may be taking too long. You second guess yourselves, you go over it again, and there's a value here in taking your first impression and then getting your feedback. You actually learn more quickly that way. You take it, you get your feedback, you find out immediately how that felt to be the right or wrong. Now, there's a such thing as doing it too fast as well. But you don't want to laboriously go over and over and over again, because then you end up muddying the waters to a great extent, and it lessens the learning effect here. So,
congratulations! You have now completed all 6 practice targets provided within the Learn Dowsing training set. But we still have some more information to cover, including additional methods of utilizing dowsing in your own life. How to set up home practice targets to continue your training. Tips for creating properly phrased tasks for dowsing targets. Managing real-world dowsing projects. And finally, some advice regarding deviceless dowsing. At this time, feel free to pause or stop the DVD. Then we'll continue with segment 24 as Paul Smith provides his closing notes and advice. Great job on finishing all 6 dowsing practice targets. At this point, you should be very familiar with the dowsing protocols and have a solid understanding of how and why dowsing works regarding subconscious function, as well as recognizing the difference between subconsciously generated responses versus those generated by your own analytical thinking process. So far, you have completed at least one exercise for each form of dowsing: on-site, map, diagram, matrix, and timeline. As instructed during the dowsing set, feel free to go back and re-execute each practice target again, although the targets now become front-loaded as opposed to being blind. By re-executing previous targets, you can continue to improve your ability to ignore AOL, while giving careful attention to the feelings and indications you receive for feedback corresponding to when you hit the targets versus missing them. Let's rejoin the class as Mr. Smith gives his final thoughts on the usefulness of dowsing, as well as progressing on to deviceless dowsing as you expand your skills.
That's the end of that part of it, the end of our practical exercises. Here's the question people often ask about remote viewing: well, what good is it? One thing it does do is prove that you're more than your physical body, which is a very important insight to have because it changes your whole perspective on life when you make that distinction between whether I'm just a biological machine or whether I am more than my physical body. Dowsing can show that as well, but why learn it? We want to come in with some practical applications as well, because that makes it more relevant. Okay. First of all, you have to use it judiciously. Don't try and make dowsing, once you presumably get good at it, of course. You don't want to rely on it until you really feel confident that you're going to get a high percentage of success with it. You don't want to necessarily use it to solve all your life problems. You want to use it carefully and use it in those situations where it can actually benefit you, rather than maybe not give you the kind of support that you need. Okay, dowsing is very often useful as a tiebreaker. When you narrow down a choice through all of the conventional means, you reach a point where you don't know where to go from here. You can't go any further with it just based on collecting information, because maybe you've got all the information that's available, but the whole point about life is that we work in what the philosophers would call an epistemically poor environment. Okay, there are lots of things we don't know, and dowsing was developed really to solve some of those problems. And so when you get in a situation in life where you have, let's say, 2 choices to make it simple here, and both of them are equally attractive or equally unattractive, and you have to decide between them, dowsing sometimes can put you over the edge in a positive direction by determining which one you actually end up choosing. Just getting rid of options sometimes is as valuable as picking other options. It can help you find useful things or valuable opportunities. What I mean is, show me which part of town I should look in for a better job, or which part of town I should look in for the house that would be most appropriate for my family. That's vague, but you can refine that. And that may actually help you to focus your attention a little bit better. If you have limited amount of time and resources, but you have a large field that you can investigate, this might help you narrow your focus of investigation to actually track down something more easily than you otherwise would. You wouldn't have as much to wade through. Okay, that's kind of like limiting less valuable options, but it's a little more positive. I particularly, to be honest, don't like instruments. I've used them. I know how they're used, but there's a couple of downsides. First of all, what if you want to dowse and you don't have an instrument? What if you're in your car and you want to find that parking spot? The ultimate goal is to learn not to have to rely on an instrument at all. Okay, and this requires, of course, you be much more in tune with what's going on inside of you and how you react to things. How do you apply it to a diagram? And this is probably better than a map, because we're talking about a discrete dowsing event here. We have 10 possible locations for this thing, so you don't have to worry about it being anywhere in a kind of a continuum field. can touch each one with a finger and see how that feels. And it may be your indicator is like a warm or cold feeling, or maybe your indicator is a little chill or a thrill. That seems to be the one that happens with me the most. And although as I said, you can manufacture those, your conscious mind can manufacture those, so you have to be very, I want to say focused, but it's really more unfocused, right? You just you have no prior opinion about this, okay? And you can touch each one in turn, and then if someplace feels a little stronger than another, you can go back and investigate it, okay? And you can do it that way.
Let's move on to setting up home practice targets and assigning tasks. We encourage you to continue your training by practicing at home and to conduct at least one dowsing target of your choice on a daily basis. At this point, you have learned all of the basic protocols for executing a technical dowsing session. But there is more to dowsing than simply becoming comfortable with the process and knowing how to acknowledge AOLs. You must also understand the process for how to set up your own dowsing tasks, which we will cover in just a moment. Also, remember the importance of feedback. Hitting a dowsing target is wonderful, but it doesn't necessarily help to train your conscious mind. After each dowsing session, you must receive immediate feedback whenever possible in order to effectively train yourself to more easily understand and identify accurate subconscious response indications and intuitional feelings. With each completed dowsing session, you should become more aware of how your own internal mechanisms operate when receiving your correct dowsing responses. Let's review what you can do to continue your practice at home. You may set up similar home practice targets for each form of dowsing, just as those presented within the Learn Dowsing set. To accomplish this, you may require the assistance of another individual. For example, when practicing an on-site dowsing session, you may conduct the sessions by asking your helper to hide an object underneath a cup or within a manila folder, or even in a bush or buried outside. Please ensure that all outdoor activities are conducted in areas that legally allow your presence and dowsing practice. When selecting a target for a practice dowsing session, you may choose any object or photo. The same principles go for setting up other targets. The maps, diagrams, matrices, and timelines you choose to utilize or create for your home practice targets are entirely up to your discretion as long as the dowsing target is clearly understood and your feedback material is accurate. This brings us back to another crucial step for successful dowsing: defining tasks. Do not underestimate the importance of defining a specific task before a dowsing session. The phrasing of your task may be the difference between success and failure. Essentially, if you ask or define an ambiguous, unclear, or imprecise question or task, you may receive meaningless indications in return. You must look at each specific dowsing situation from a broader viewpoint. Do not assume that because you consciously understand what it is you want or know, or what your target is, that your subconscious will understand. For example, if a dowser is looking for a missing plane that crashed somewhere in Mexico, he may begin his dowsing process by formulating a task like this: show me where in Mexico the plane crashed. To the dowser, the question is clear. However, to the subconscious, the task is far too ambiguous. The mistake was that without a specific picture for reference material, such as the ones you were shown during your training targets, the dowser neglected to mention the exact plane that he or she is looking for. This can lead the subconscious to provide feedback data regarding any crash plane during any time period. Defining a task properly can be just as important as the actual dowsing session itself. The key to successful tasking is to not make assumptions regarding your target. Your tasks should be clear enough to remove any possible chance of misinterpretation even by other individuals. Think in terms of formulating your dowsing task to be as simple and precise as possible. Also, when you are executing your home practice targets, remember to quit on a high. Like conducting any skill, your mind can become tired after prolonged use of dowsing. When you have a successful session or feel as though you are becoming tired, be sure to take a sufficient break.
Obviously, you want to be as specific as you can. You want to be as clear and unambiguous as you can. And so you identify, and we talked a bit about analyzing the task, analyzing what the mission was, analyzing it very carefully, and determining what subtasks there might be to actually accomplish a full task, and also be just as explicit as possible. So, for example, let's say it's a missing person. Terry Waite, we'll just use Terry Waite, a famous hostage situation. Find Terry Waite, and then try and douse a map of Lebanon, okay? Because it might find the Terry Waite that lives next door. It might find some other Terry Waite who's not even a male, a female Terry Waite, So, and there might even be another Terry Waite in Lebanon for all you know. So you might say, find the Terry Waite that is the hostage of Hezbollah. And then you have to determine, is it find the present location of Terry Waite, or find the location in 3 days of Terry Waite? It at least is going to narrow the possibilities. So if the goal is to recover Terry Waite, and you have the possibility of that happening, then you don't want necessarily to have his current location. You may want to have his future location at the time that it's actionable. Okay? So that may introduce or remove some ambiguity depending on how you phrase it.
Let's move on to managing a dowsing project. This is the final segment of the Learn Dowsing DVD set. When you have become proficient enough in your dowsing ability, you may consider executing a dowsing project. Projects may consist of solving any real-world problem, such as hunting for treasure or attempting to locate a missing object that has been misplaced. Paul Smith discusses a dowsing project example.
Finding a missing pet, how do you use dowsing for that? Is it close? Is it far? You want to specify these distances. Like, is it on this block? Is it in between the area bordered by Utah Street and Buchanan? It's a long ways, but okay. Is it, you can set up parameters and then continue on down from there, right? Is it out in the wild or outdoors? In a way, then you probably want to switch to continuum search in that case. Probably what you want to do. But anyway, you start selecting the different methods that you're going to, whichever one is appropriate for the case that you've illuminated. At a certain point, if it's really something like an animal, you or someone is going to have to go look. Right? So there will ultimately be a physical search of some kind. And that can involve dowsing, or it may involve just eyes on the ground because you've narrowed the area down and you say, go look in this place. First of all, you find out what the parameters are. And this is a mistake people sometimes make, is they assume the parameters are narrower than they are. You have to make sure that you have the widest possible parameter that it cannot be outside of. Now that sounds like it's the opposite of what I just said about narrowing things down. But it's not, because you want it to narrow it as much as possible, but you don't want to narrow it too much, because if you do, you may actually move your search parameters inside of where the thing actually is. So you want to get it the widest possible that it can't possibly be outside of, and then proceed to narrow it down from there in your search. What happens if the dowser comes up with a wrong scenario? So let's say the dowser says, oh, the cat is warm and safe inside a house somewhere. Okay, and the cat is really out under a bush getting rained on and totally miserable, right? Well, the condition is that you may fail to find your object. I mean, the ultimate thing is that you have total failure in your search project, and that does happen, and it can happen. You have to face that possibility. The one thing to bear in mind about that is that possibility exists even in a conventional search, and that's oftentimes something the skeptics don't acknowledge. Is that, okay, just because you're psychic doesn't mean you're going to be right, even if it does work sometimes, right? Sometimes you're going to be wrong, just like the sheriff's department doesn't find everybody either when they're out searching, okay? So you may have a failure. The alternative is, the hopeful outcome is that you go and search within what you have the area you specified, and you don't find anything, and we presume that the search has been thorough enough, you're confident that you were wrong, okay? You go back to the drawing board and try it again. But in one respect, you've eliminated one of your possible scenarios. You've gotten rid of one part of your dowsing problem, at the very least, and that narrows it down and makes it more likely you're going to get right the second time, okay? Of course, just by eliminating alternatives, you increase the odds even in a chance situation. But you do what you can. The idea of dowsing gives you an edge. The idea is that dowsing gives you an edge that you don't have using your conventional senses.
There are 5 steps you should keep in mind whenever you conduct a real-world project. First, evaluate the problem. Make sure you clearly understand what it is you need to accomplish with dowsing. Be very decisive and try not to fool yourself in regards to the true information you need to become aware of. Also, you may need to break a more complex dowsing project down into smaller dowsing tasks to make it easier to be precise and specific in your tasking formulation. Second, define your task. As previously explained, make sure that your phrasing makes perfect sense and eliminates the possibility of being too ambiguous. If needed, remember to include descriptors for defining time, location, and the specific object or answer you are seeking. Third, choose your dowsing method and instrument. For most dowsing projects, any one of the usual tools or the use of deviceless dowsing will suffice, but some projects will require a more specific choice. Ask yourself which tool, L-rods, pendulum, or deviceless, would be the most effective in your situation, or whether it makes a difference at all. Step 4. Decide what your yes and no indications will be based on your task. Remember, your questions for a yes and a no response can differ based on the specific question or task you have defined for your project. In most cases, the standard show me a yes and show me a no responses seem to work quite well. Make sure your yes and no indications make sense and can be used with the form of dowsing and device you have selected. And finally, gather your supplies, materials, and dowsing aids. Select or create the appropriate maps or diagrams if those will be needed for your dowsing project. Don't forget to have additional materials such as bond paper and pens within reach for immediate use if necessary. Congratulations! You have officially completed your technical dowsing training. Your dedication up to this point shows that you are sincere in your desire to learn and use dowsing. But remember that you're not alone. Register at dowsingcommunity.net or by clicking on the community link at learndowsing.com to access the student area. There you can discuss dowsing theory, formulate tasks, and more. Remember, the dowsing community is a free service to the students of the Learn Dowsing set and is not guaranteed to all members. Please refer to the forum rules posted at dowsingcommunity.net. We wish you the best of luck as you continue your dowsing practice.
station.